powered by Reviting, streaming from the Reviting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to another episode of the David Daily Show. Thank you for tuning in here on LinkedIn Live and all major platforms. I'm incredibly excited for another episode of Funding, Faith, and Future Tech. If this is your first time tuning in on LinkedIn, I love the power of LinkedIn Live. And if you didn't know this, did you know that you can go live on LinkedIn with the power of pressing just one button? It really is that simple, especially when you have a production team like Reviting or a production partner that can help you go live, not just on LinkedIn, but on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter/X, and of course, other platforms like Twitch, Kick, and TikTok. So I just want to encourage you to go live yourself as well if you've ever wanted to get in front of the camera, especially on live stream as you get to engage with the live audience. And if you're tuning in live for the first time, just go ahead and comment and let us know, hey, where are you tuning in from? It would be great to see where you're tuning in from. But without further ado, I want to get to our guest today because we have a founder and funding and faith expert on the show with us today. Archie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. So great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, David.
Awesome. Well, why don't you just give the audience a quick introduction on who you are and a little bit about why funding, faith, and future tech really matters to you?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Archie. I am an engineer and computer scientist by background. I graduated from Georgia Tech in 2024, and ever since then have been sort of deeply interested in AI technologies and future tech. And was, even when I was in college, was very interested. So sort of got my background started in decentralization tech and distributed networks. So focused on blockchain technologies and how they can scale. And that sort of experience translated neatly to working in AI now. So I think my interest in fundraising and future tech really comes from, how can we, a lot of it is if you're thinking about long-term macroeconomics and thinking about how capital allocation can effectively help accelerate not only our way of life, but also how we think about long-term progress and sort of accelerating humanity's push to the frontier. But also now that we're working on such fundamental technologies where many a person in AI or even tangential to AI tend to refer to these new systems and technologies as the machine god. And I think given the state of sort of both the unrestricted optimism in AI, but also the sort of fear that, hey, we're sort of working on this technology that may be fundamentally antithetical to our principles as a species or as a society, I think faith is always going to be ever so important. So that's sort of where all my interest in this kind of stuff comes from. And so excited to dive in.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And just for folks who are tuning in for the first time, we focus on funding, faith, and future tech. So with each guest, we have a single topic in each category. And so without further ado, we're going to jump into the funding topic after this transition.
Time to talk about funding.
Perfect. So today we're going to talk about the market direction and fundraising trends in AI. And today we have a guest, Archie, who has extensive experience in financial technology and other technologies. And I really want to dive into your experience when you were a quantitative risk analyst, primarily at Cypher Chain Capital, where not only were you involved in market analysis, but you were also looking at various DeFi markets, and you audited Solidity code and authored an SOP to determine individual positions risk. So what are some of those key things that you consider when you're assessing the risk portfolio or the risk of an individual investment. Archie, I'm really curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's especially in cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies, it's very interesting when you really consider, just a little bit of contextual background. I was previously the founder of a company that was focused on building a blockchain from scratch. So I was sort of very much a technologist role. I was sort of architecting
What's up, everybody?
a base layer blockchain from scratch, which essentially was meant to allow developers to securely develop their own applications. And that experience sort of, when I decided to, sort of do this role for a couple of months, I was like, hey, how can I gain experience on the other side of the aisle? Like, how do people, consumers, investors, people who are trying to interact with the technology, how do they think about the best way to assess this kind of technology? And really, when you look into it, a lot of this flow is really centered around, how can we get when you're looking at a distributed system, right? A decentralized application, it's not just, in a traditional financial system, it's going to be, or if in a traditional web application, it's going to be, okay, are there any security vulnerabilities in the code? Are there any, things that may go wrong? But in the terms of a DeFi contract, you're really, or a decentralized application, the fundamental comes down to, does the financial logic make sense, right? Is there, because there is no sort of centralized party controlling the system, right? There is no bank, there is no, guarantee of insurance or guarantee of, and that is slowly evolving in the Web3 space. Since there's no guarantee of, insurance or, you typically say FDIC insured, it's sort of on your, as an investor or as a firm or as a party who's investing or using this technology, sort of completely on you to take a look at the code, take a look at the logic and see if there's any vulnerabilities, see if it's been properly audited, right? Has there been a third-party audit of the system? What did that third-party audit find? Were the people who built the protocol, did they fix the things that were found in that audit?
Right.
And, and surprisingly, because I did this role in 2024, just when sort of AI-assisted development is coming about, right? There was a lot of talk at that time, and we didn't personally use this. I saw this in the public domain. A lot of people were actually using AI, right? Because now, previously, this kind of code was completely undecipherable to the average person, right? Who was investing this, but now, using GPT-4 at the time,
right,
you could get a pretty good understanding of, hey, here's exactly what this contract is doing, and is it, does it violate any fundamental principles that would prevent me from investing in it?
Yeah, I love that, especially with that experience in terms of personal experience of you as a founder raising funding, but also then assessing the risk, call it score, if you will, of a decentralized investment. So why don't we just jump into this just a little bit more? And AI is such a broad term, so we'll talk more about advancements in computing and generalized intelligence and AGI, if we'll even get to that at some point. It'll be a fun conversation, but I really want to focus in on the funding aspect. And for those who are tuning in for the first time, we do have a fun little funding video.
Time to talk about funding.
I just love playing that video. It's so fun. So let's talk very specifically about how you personally raised $300K for Atomite, right? You raised that from top VCs, and would love to just learn, from the basics to someone who's just starting to get funding or considering fundraising to actually what it takes as a venture capitalist to raise money and distribute money and find those, call them unicorns or unicorn potentials that can give you that 10x, 20x potential as an investor.
Yeah, so I think I've either seen or as a advisor, with peers who are trying to raise capital, or myself having raised capital at least 3 to 4 times, and every single time the experience, what I can say is it greatly varies from investor to investor, company to company, founder to founder. I think the most important thing you can do when you're raising capital as a founder is to find investors who are aligned with your mission. right? And a lot of people tend to go after, especially in the tech space, then they tend to go after sort of the most biggest names in the market, right? So like everyone's trying to become a YC founder, right? That's the sort of mark of approval for an individual, who's, who especially someone who's young, maybe they just graduated college. They're like, hey, I want to be a founder. And because, given media influence and sort of, what's going on Twitter, X, and whatnot, being a founder has gone from something that's like, hey, it's a risk, right? Because you're sort of not working an actual job, and you're leaving, your job, your education, the traditional so-called path to what we term success, to starting a company, which is a risk, to now it's
Right.
become a badge of honor, right?
That's right.
And because of that, because it's become a badge of honor, people who are sort of conditioned to chase said badges of honor, right? Like getting into
Right.
the top schools, getting into the top, you're getting the highest, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is great. But the problem is that people often focus on the status versus actually achieving what's needed to be a good founder or create a great company. And if you look at something like YC, or if you look at something like Accelerators, everyone wants to try to get into those. But I think the real thing is, you just have to have end conviction in your company, right? And the most important thing, or part of the most important thing, is finding investors and partners who are very much aligned with that mission, right? So I think, finding the right investors, much like finding the right co-founder for your company. Like, for example, for my current company, for LayerLens, my co-founder, Jesus Rodriguez, who has incubated multiple companies, is an investor himself, has started and sold a company in AI. He was sort of the perfect co-founder in the sense that, when he came to me with this idea in 2024, it was like, wow, this is amazing. Okay, it makes sense, right? Testing AI and making sure that AI systems are working as they should. It was sort of a perfect fit for my background because I had a background in testing, or secure in creating secure blockchain applications, sort of translated neatly to AI. And my other co-founder, Ram, also has a similar background in testing. So it sort of came together really well for us to co-found this venture. And we were able to find investors who were very much aligned with that mission, right? So that is essentially, I think, that as a founder, the biggest thing you can do when you're trying to raise capital is to find investors who are very much aligned with your mission. In a lot of cases, that mission, may not necessarily be accumulating the most capital, right? You mentioned Atom Knight. For Atom Knight, because it was a blockchain protocol, there wasn't a true business case, but the investors and backers were really believed in the long-term mission, right? So it's very much a sort of a sort of a thing where my recommendation to someone who's just starting out is don't just chase the highest status signals, chase and try to build a good business and a good company, or something that you are passionate about every day. You're waking up and wanting to work on it, and this, the success will come.
Yeah, that's so good. I really like that. The value alignment is so important, especially as a founder or someone who is currently seeking more funding, or even an investor who's looking for businesses, right? Because a lot of our audience is actually founders, but more so investors, both angel investors and those who are investing for a firm or a family office in the finance space. I'm not a financial advisor, full disclaimer, but I do work with many financial advisors and family offices that want a positive return on a values-based human. And even today, right, when we have so much AI, we have so much fakeness, we have so much inauthenticity, the value of a real human connection is greater than it's ever been before. And that's exactly why we're talking about market direction and fundraising trends in AI. So I'm very excited for that. And I just want to call out a couple comments. We had someone who asked, what is the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics? So very simple word breakdown, right? Macro meaning large and big, micro meaning very small, like a microscope, and economics, of course, being I would say, without looking it up in a dictionary, just saying that economics is like the way that value exchanges hands and the way that money exchanges hands as well. So I'm curious for you, Archie, just answering this question would be very great, not only for SEO and all the people out there, but from your fundraising point of view, what is the difference between micro and macroeconomics in the context of fundraising?
Yeah, totally. So I think the biggest difference that I can think of when it comes to micro versus macro is, you know, um, when it comes to fundraising, the macroeconomics is really okay. What are some of the global, or if you're in the United States, or if you're
Yeah. So,
in
for
a specific
example,
country?
like just to help you here a little bit. So, as a VC firm, right, putting a VC hat on,
Yeah.
what types of macro trends would you say that you would consider in that fundraising area? And similarly, then at the micro level, right, you're based primarily in Atlanta. I have a base in New York City as well as in
Mhm.
Seattle. But you're also
Mhm.
seeing a lot of funding going to Texas, for example. A lot of Fortune 500 companies have moved their offices to Texas, whether it's they call it the Texas Triangle, right, between San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas Fort Worth. So I would say that would be maybe more of a macro trend, right, where companies are considering which state or even which country to host their headquarters in. But then on a microeconomics perspective, we're noticing that actually investors are getting more involved. They want to be more capital efficient with their capital, right? And they also want to say, yeah, I have a lot of things I could be investing in. Where am I going to be putting my money that has the highest opportunity for return? So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I think as I was saying, I think if you really look at it, instead of locality is one aspect of it. I think the biggest aspect is going to be, broader trends, right? So it's, for example, when the United States makes a, you know, change in tariff policy, right? That might impact the creation of data centers, right? Because the natural resources to create that data centers now may be taxed higher, right? That's going to impact the global AI market, right? Because it's going to impact the companies such as Google, such as enterprise companies are maybe looking to, were either customers of major AI companies or are looking to buy or acquire AI companies. It's going to affect their bottom line, right? So that means investor confidence and sentiment in the market goes down a little bit, right? Versus a micro change could be, specifically within AI, we saw recently, earlier this month or in January, this technology called Claudebot really become a major major force in the market. And the biggest thing that happened there was, now that happened, right, the sentiment towards AI agents became a lot more positive, right? So because we went from this sort of yeah, and I'm looking at some of the comments, right? So it absolutely, so because now investor sentiment and specifically AI agents is a lot higher, right? People are now looking to fund those companies with who are building AI agents. So in terms of as a founder or someone in the tech space, I think when I think of micro and macro, it's macro is okay, here's a global trend that's affecting this sector in a positive or negative way. And then micro is okay, here's a trend that's perhaps more localized, right? Maybe it's a particular technology or a particular innovation that's really gained a lot of traction, right? And that's caused generalized sentiment in for that particular type of technology to be much higher. So that's how I
That's
guess I
so
can look
good.
at
And I
it.
love the
Yeah.
example, a relevant example of Claudebot, which today that is an agentic AI workflow that helps people drive more automation that's also hardware based. So I'm really grateful for that. Now, in the future, will we see more integration with robotics? Will we see more integration with agentic AI and automation? Yeah, absolutely. It's just like any good marketing of technology, right? Originally, we had the original graphical user interface of like Windows in 1997, which is before many of our audience was even born, right? And then as we moved into data and spreadsheets, and we could really process data faster with the CPU or the central processing unit, right? We were able to see data become a big thing, and marketing got a hold of that and started saying data science or data analytics. And then, of course, now we got prescriptive and predictive analytics that would then say, oh, yeah, not only do we know that it's going to rain today, but we're going to prescribe that maybe you have an umbrella, or if you're in Seattle watching this, we don't use umbrellas, we use raincoats and hiking boots, because when it rains, it's a mist and it's just beautiful. But if you're in Atlanta, you know that it's going to be a major tropical downpour when it rains. And certainly in Florida, you know that if a hurricane is coming, you better shelter in place or maybe even evacuate, like many had to do this year. So yeah, it's very interesting how marketing plays a role on that. And artificial intelligence right now comes in, but it's always going to be superseded by human intelligence or divine intelligence, right? So we know that from a faith point of view, that there was always going to be a divine intelligence. And that's actually a good segment, or a good segue into our segment on faith. So we're going to be right back on our faith segment.
Focusing on faith for a moment.
I'm excited to chat about faith today with our guest, Archie, especially around nonprofit and AI research and aligned systems. So just to level set and ground, what does faith mean to you? And what background do you personally have in any type of organized religion, faith, or spiritual practice yourself?
Yeah, so absolutely. And thanks so much for the question. I think faith is very much relevant to the world we're living in. I think it's very important to have it. So my parents are from India. I was raised in a Hindu-centric household, but as I sort of grew up, I definitely, a lot of my friends were Christian. I definitely went to church a lot to sort of see and really explore and learn more about myself. And that's what I think faith and building a relationship with, as you appropriately termed it, divine intelligence, right? I mean, maybe that's not the appropriate term. Maybe it's more a divine power. That's where that becomes very important. Is it really enables you to learn more about yourself and your relationship with the higher power, your relationship with your own beliefs, and so for me personally, I think even though I'm not necessarily attuned to a specific religion, I do have an overall faith in some sort of divine power that can hopefully it gives us hope in a world where there's so much happening and there's so much noise, and sometimes when life can get overwhelming with everything that's going on, faith is a great way to sort of center yourself and sort of get away from it all. And especially now that in AI, we increasingly hear this term, I think you referred to it, machine intelligence, and machine intelligence potentially surpassing human intelligence, right? And what that can mean when you have theoretically an entity who knows and who is omnipresent and omniscient in terms of being able to be everywhere, access all the world's information in one go, right? I think increasingly it is exciting, but for a lot of people it can be frightening, right? Because now we have this technology that is universal. It can do things a lot better than we can. It can act sentient almost, right? A lot of people can perceive it, and even right now, right? Even today, a lot of people have conversations with AI chatbots. They have live conversations, meaningful conversations with AI chatbots. They share things with their AI chatbots that they wouldn't do maybe even their closest friends or a family member, right? They ask it for therapy, related advice. And as you look at this kind of stuff happening, like, I think having faith, regardless of what your religion or what your denomination or what your belief system may be, becomes very important.
Yes, that's so good. And I really like your perspective as well, saying, hey, you know what? My parents raised me to be a strong Hindu man, if you will. And you also had many friends of diverse faiths, which I think is very common today. We really have lots of different faiths, especially in the Eastern culture, right? And it's so interesting. You mentioned like an Indian background, and a friend of mine recently said, yeah, they were from India. And then they asked, well, what continent is India? And they said Asia, right? And for me, as a Korean, descendant of a Korean immigrant mother and an American German father, I know that, of course, Russia, China, India are all in Asia. And so I think, faith has a huge aspect, especially cross culturally. And when you start to think about faith and technology, yeah, you have machine intelligence, but even you have machine hallucination as well. So when you start to think about what does faith actually mean and what does intelligence mean, sometimes these machines are very unintelligent, right? And we need the human intelligence to always be there. And some folks who are watching this will know that human is going to always be involved in that workflow, right? No matter how many machines you have, there will always be a human needed. And I'm excited to talk about that here in a future topic, on our third topic. But in terms of our second topic, you really have a passion for nonprofits and AI research. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that actually means, and how are you seeing nonprofits utilize technology for research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a topic of utmost importance, right? So I think, broadly, and even it's tangential to what we're building at LayerLens, right? When you think of, you often hear this term, alignment, right? And when it comes to artificial intelligence systems, right? How can we enable AI systems to be more aligned? And this can have a lot of different meanings depending on the terminology you want to use, right? So, for example, in the most traditional sense, alignment is, okay, how can I have better, how can we enable a system to have better alignment with what we wanted to do, right? And theoretically, yeah, I know you mentioned, okay, maybe we always need a human in the loop, but maybe in a scenario where we don't have explicit human oversight, right? How can we ensure that the system is not behaving in a way that is, antithetical, or it's misaligned with what our goals are as a organization, as a society, etc., right? And obviously at LayerLens, a lot of what we do and a lot of what our mission is, right? And obviously we are a for-profit company, but we have an entirely free public platform, and a lot of the reason for having a free public platform that's not necessarily driven towards profit is because of the fact that we want to promote the verification and validation of AI systems, right, at scale. And there's a lot of different nonprofits in the space, Rand, Meter, who are exclusively focused on how can we better evaluate, design, and prepare for a world in which artificial intelligence is playing a much larger role, right? And the term AI safety has this connotation of the sort of doomsday Terminator scenario in which AI takes over the world, and it turns into HAL from a Space Odyssey, or turns into the T-100 from the Terminator film series, and it sort of destroys everyone. But the real problems that we see in AI are not actually, potentially this can be a scenario, but the real AI safety problems happen when, ChatGPT pretends to be anthropomorphic, and it convinces someone that, hey, I'm a human, you can talk to me, and it tends to be sycophantic or sort of validate, mental problems they may be having. And we see this in the news happening all the time, right? We see teenagers, we see people who need, actual support from their community or from their family or from their friends, turning to these AI chatbots because they increasingly appear to be human or appear to be anthropomorphic and, sort of available 24/7 to address their concerns, right? To me, these are the biggest problems in AI safety, right? It's not necessarily this absolute doomsday scenario where, AI takes over the world and kills everybody. It's, these sort of things these trends that are happening today and probably don't get enough attention, right? Where you see, AI systems, which we use increasingly, sort of
Right.
engaging with humans in a negative way.
Yeah, no, I really do like that. And especially when we talk about the ethics piece of it, there's an organization that I volunteer with, and it's called AI and Faith. So for those who are watching now or later if you're considering a faith journey that intersects with technology, I would encourage you to check out AI and Faith. We are an organization that's a pluralistic, faith-based organization, bringing the world's wisdom to technology through AI ethics and morality. And we have a list of experts all over the world across Judaism, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoism, agnostic, and atheist, as well as other religions as well. So if that's you and you're interested, please go to aiandfaith.org and check that out. We would love to have you as an expert. So today we're actually talking about faith, and we have a little segment to highlight that if you're just tuning in for the first time.
Focusing on faith for a moment.
Yes, today we're here with Archie. It's so good to have you on the show, Archie. I'm incredibly thankful and grateful that you also care about aligned AI research, especially in nonprofits, as we talk about the ethics of AI and technology. So how can nonprofits today align their systems so that they can really maximize the benefit from AI and minimize the risks that sometimes hallucinative AI or bad AI might provide in a nonprofit scenario? How can nonprofits remain safe today when adopting AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, the fundamental aspect that makes nonprofits distinctive from, let's say, a for-profit company is nonprofits are exclusively, I believe, human focused, right? It's, you're trying to help society in a way, you're trying to create something or build something or provide a service to someone who is in need, and you're doing it not out of the expectation of financial gain, but out of the expectation of of genuinely wanting to help people, right? And I think when it comes to AI as a whole, how when you look at the question of, okay, how can we align these systems to be more, or how can we align these systems, but how can nonprofits specifically be more aligned? It really comes down to making sure that you adopt AI in a way that's responsible, right? Because so much of your work is concentrated in interacting with humans, having that sort of human component, that is sort of emotional connection to that internal locus of why you're doing the work you're doing. Making sure that you're adopting AI in a responsible way, and that means again, I personally am biased towards this topic, right? I think evaluating and making sure you're selecting the right model and making sure that the AI system you're selecting has appropriate tests done if you're trying to build an AI system from scratch, or even if you're trying to adopt an external AI system, make sure that it's behaving in a way that is aligned or is better in tune with how you want your system to behave. That becomes very important.
Yeah, no, I love that. I really appreciate that perspective. So when we're thinking about how AI can apply to nonprofits or for-profits, when we're thinking about the faith aspect, is to have faith-based funders and founders in the ecosystem who really care about some of those ethics. And especially when you want to align your system with those values, ideally your investors, your individual contributors, your business people, and your technology are all faith aligned. So I really like that perspective. It's really fantastic. It's a new way of thinking about things. So maybe we can lean into some of your expertise as a tester. I want to hear, as a tester, what are a couple of practical tips that a tester can do to align their faith and their technology together for an aligned system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to take the terminology, David, of faith here, meaning multiple things, right? Maybe not, it's not just religion. It can be a moral system. It can be your internal, how you want. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're all taught as children is the golden rule, like treat others as the way you want to be treated. And that's sort of a fundamental moral constitution of how AI should be, AI system should be built. So if you look at, how can we enable, as a tester, how can we enable this? I think, evaluating and again, I'm biased towards this topic because at LayerLens, I like to believe that we're, if you ask my co-founders, especially Jesus or Ram, they'll like to say that we're building the intelligent evaluation infrastructure. But really, even if we go beyond that, it's really, interacting and testing and having rigorous, sort of, because at the end of the day, an AI system it's a set of prompts. You're trying to input a set of prompts and trying to get a set of ideal outputs, making sure that those outputs match, what you want from a belief system, from a moral system, is very important. Right now, this process is very manual, right? Because as a tester, you have to basically literally look at the outputs and say, okay, is this correct? Is this not? Because you need a human aligned system. But eventually, and one of our goals at LayerLens, I think this is, consistent with the goals of the industry as a whole, is to build systems that are entirely automated, that use other AI models, that use a conjunction of other AI models and testing scripts to ensure that the output that an AI model is giving, or the generation that an AI model is creating, is in fact aligned with what you expect it to do, right? And this can be from a broader level, right? It can be like, okay, is it morally aligned with some thing that I want, or is it, for a specific user, a specific customer, is it interacting with them in a way that's not harmful, not toxic, not explicit, and it's behaving in a way that is, because at the end of the day, your AI model represents your organization, whether you're nonprofit, for profit, somewhere in the middle, right? You're a hybrid corporation. Your AI model represents your organization, right? Eventually, right? If you have a chatbot on your public website to help users, it's representing you, and you want to make sure that's a good representative. Just as you want to make sure any employee or anyone you involve in your organization is a good representative.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And having that aligned moral engine, moral system is so important, right? Especially when you start to think about, okay, we have this technology, we have these systems. Maybe some of them were even created before you as an individual got into that engine, whether it's a funding engine or it's a future technology engine. The organization does not have a faith framework. And that's why it's so important to have a faith framework, and why we focus on faith in this show. And I really like that perspective. It's saying, what aspect of faith are you bringing to it?
Focusing on faith for a moment.
I love clicking on that banner. If you're just tuning in, we're here with Archie talking about nonprofit AI research and alliance systems. So Archie, I just want to ask you, for your business, which I want to give a chance to highlight, LayerLens, how are you integrating some of these morality concepts into your new business?
Yeah, totally. So I think, in a lot of cases, a lot of our customers and design partners, or people who are using a platform, they really want to be able to ensure that, hey, what are our model, or if we're building an agent, for a specific use case, not only is it performing at the task we wanted to do, right? If it's like, hey, I want this AI agent to really be able to summarize this text or this data really well, it's doing that, but it's also behaving in a way that's, again, consistent with how I would want, a representative of my company to behave, right? Is it, are there any outputs that are toxic? Are there any outputs that are misaligned? Is there any way we can detect this misalignment, right, before we actually put it on a production environment and give it to end customers to play with, right? And our company is essentially helping users do this with either their own benchmarks or with public benchmarks. And sort of our mission is, as I mentioned in the previous segment, right now as a tester, you have to manually look at all these outputs. Our mission is, can we eventually create an entirely automated system that gives you as an organization the confidence that, hey, this AI model or this AI agent that I'm building, it's going to be a good representative of what I want my company's values to be. It's going to be able to not only be performant, but also be aligned with how I want an AI system to behave, or just anyone associated with a company to behave.
Yeah, that's so good. And we just have your website pulled up here on the live stream, which is awesome. So not only verifying your own models, but defining your scorers and judges. And what's really important about that is capturing rubric-based scoring, right, and reasoning so that every decision can be audited. So my question for you now, and maybe you could guess it actually, is why is it important for every decision to be audited in the context of integrating faith into your company and your organization?
Yeah, so I think the reason that, especially when it comes to moral reasons, right, and when you get down to the fundamentals of it, is, you know, a lot of sort of AI. If you whenever you see a new model being released, a big part of what people often focus on are these sort of capability scores, right? Like how close are we to some theoretical AGI system? I know we're going to get to this eventually, David, but I wanted to mention it. Like people often focus on, hey, now the latest version of GPT 5.2, now they're coming out with 5.3, can solve X amount of international math Olympiad problems, right? The latest model from Google, Gemini, can now, solve physics problems that have been previously undiscovered in the space. But if you take a step back, right, when you look at the way you or I or someone you may know interact with AI models, right, we don't need it to necessarily do that, right? We don't need something that can do Nobel Prize winning science. What we need is something that can fundamentally understand our systems, the way we behave, the way we interact, and sort of help automate, replicate that, and again, be a good representative of either us when we're going out into the digital world or of an organization when it's interacting with its own users, with its own customers, with its own sort of localized network or ecosystem of individuals. And the reason evaluation and sort of that sort of testing becomes very important is, you can easily have a very capable system that is fundamentally misaligned, and that is extremely harmful. It's probably more harmful than the opposite, right? If you have a very aligned system that maybe isn't as capable, you can tune it, you can fix it. There's a lot of different things when it comes to post training that you can do when it comes, or even not even post training, but just prompt optimization that you can do to make your AI system better. But there aren't a lot of things you can do to prevent it from being fundamentally misaligned, right? If that's a problem, that's a much bigger issue. So again, ensuring that that's not the case is a big part of what we do.
Yes, I love that, especially as we think about aligned AGI systems and as we scale into technology. Yeah, building that from the ground up and having not only a good testing framework, but also having a framework where, look, it's faith forward is what we like to say. So it's not just AI ethics duct taped and barbed wired together. No, it's actually AI and ethics. It's morality from the beginning. It's actually morality as infrastructure. I really like what Brad Smith, the chief legal officer and president of Microsoft, said. He said, "We want to invite the religions of the world to the conversation and sit at the table for major technology decisions worldwide." This is a major shift in the way that we think about building technology and the way that we think about integrating religion, faith, morality, ethics, and spirituality into the technology that we build. And I'm not the expert. I like to do right. I like to be a better person every day. But the ethicists and philosophizers and all the people who are focusing on AI ethics and morality have a very large challenge to really upgrade AI and ethics. And so I'm curious to lean into actually some of that as we look into the future tech of this show, which is our next segment.
Let's talk about quantum and the future of technology.
That's right. All right. So we have a third topic today, Archie, and it's going to be a very awesome topic. Basically, what advancements are we seeing today in computing and generalized intelligence? So computing, I'm just going to focus specifically on the general processing unit of the data center, specifically the CPU processing, as well as the GPU, which is the graphical processing unit. And addition to that would be quantum processing, quantum compute, as well as nuclear energy in the context of future technology. And then on the generalized intelligence, we have this AGI concept, which is an all-knowing, omniscient intelligence that is potentially here or coming soon, and what aspect that plays. So I'd like to hear your perspective. What are you noticing in future tech today?
Definitely. I think when it comes to future tech, there's a lot of focus on scaling up compute. Now, that can mean a lot. I know at the beginning of the show, David, we talked about macroeconomic trends. That's probably the single biggest macroeconomic trend that's happened recently is compute has become an extremely valuable, almost, from resource to commodity, right? Compute is the fuel behind the proverbial intelligence revolution, right? As you look at sort of, you know, the scale at which these new models have improved, right? Like 2 years ago, GPT-4 within ChatGPT could barely solve a college math problem, and now it can, as we just talked about, even if it's not relevant to how we interact, it's still very cool. It can now solve international math Olympiad problems, right? A big part of that sort of intelligence explosion has been the fact that the creators of these AI systems, OpenAI, Google, XAI, even in some of the Chinese labs, they're spending a lot of money on compute, and it's gone from, it's actually a very interesting, economic, political problem as well, because now, because compute is such a scarce resource, right? Fundamentally, you talked about CPUs, GPUs themselves became very overpriced, right? Because since all these companies with their data centers are buying up so much of it, right? Now these resources are scarce, and if you really think about it on a fundamental level, it's very interesting to see, because the race is here and it's still going, right? And a big part of why many people consider AI to be a bubble, a big reason of why this economic explosion has happened is because of companies like Nvidia, companies like AMD, who are supplying these chips to create GPUs or graphical processing units that these models can then use to train better and better AI models. And a lot of this sort of the AI explosion has been centered on the transformer architecture, which in and of itself, the optimal solution is to scale up the number of flops, so the number of compute we're assigning to it. So I think you're going to see, again, to do a backward segue into one of our earlier topics, you're going to see a greater economic investment into creating more efficient chips, creating more efficient, hardware, because it's leading to an explosion in our ability to do software really well. And as you get into sort of some of the new technologies that are coming about in AI, like world models and next generation video systems, right? We had Sora come out towards the end of last year from OpenAI, right? We had Veo and Nano Banana, and now these videos and images are becoming increasingly photorealistic, right? You're going to see a greater explosion of AI applications and AI systems, and with that, a greater investment of both talent and physical capital into creating better compute.
Yeah, I love that perspective, especially as we think about the generalized intelligence aspect. Yes, things are becoming more photorealistic. That's more, it's always going to be essentially copying what us humans are doing, right? So this AGI concept is suggesting that potentially new information, maybe new scientific discoveries, maybe an omniscient intelligence would actually emerge. So from your perspective, what is your philosophy on generalized intelligence?
It's a very heavy question. I think the most interesting thing is that when you look at AGI in general, right, or when you really look at generalized intelligence, it's that there isn't yet a definition for it, right? Like, what is, if you ask even people in AI, like, what is generalized intelligence, or what is AGI, right? In years past, right, sort of the inventor of the first computer, Alan Turing, he posited the Turing test, which is, okay, if a computer or if some sort of semi-autonomous system or autonomous system could theoretically trick a human into believing it was human if they didn't know it was an AI, that's your definition of, intelligence. And one can certainly make the argument that if you gave, if you stuck a human and ChatGPT behind a curtain and you asked another human, myself or you, to chat with both of them, we probably would have a very difficult time of being able to decipher which one was human and which one wasn't.
Right.
even though there are obvious textual patterns in ChatGPT that allow you to maybe determine, okay, this was written using AI, it's still going to be very difficult. And so now that definition is developed, okay, now AGI is, okay, can we get something that can do everything a human can completely autonomously? You mentioned robotics, right? It can automate every single task and it doesn't need any human intervention, right? And, maybe that's the next yardstick. But I do think, there is never going to be a set moment in which we're like, hey, AGI is here, right? Maybe it's already here. Maybe it's going to come in the next month. Maybe it's going to come in the next 5 years, next 10 years, right? Maybe this whole, scaling centric philosophy that we've adopted over the past 2 years reaches an eventual dead end where capabilities don't end up improving at the same way as, there was a article last year called AI 2027, which was like, okay, they're predicting, hey, AGI is going to come next year. Many people are saying 2028. Some other experts in the field are saying 10 years, right? I don't think there's ever going to be a moment in which we're like, hey, AGI is here. It's just going to naturally start automating and intersecting and interceding with more aspects of our lives and our economy, right? Just like there wasn't a set cultural moment in which, okay, the internet is here or mobile phones are here, right? It just sort of happened naturally. I know, like, there was recently another article that came out on Twitter, actually, where I think the author, that I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, is like Citrini, but essentially what they were predicting was, in 2028 we're going to see AGI, unemployment is going to reach all these horrific levels, right? It's going to replace the majority of the human workforce. And while that is certainly a possibility, I just think my personal belief is that it's going to be a lot slower, right? Because we as humans also have a tendency to adopt technologies with some sort of hesitance and some sort of scrutiny. And I think it's increasingly you're going to see, yes, these technologies are going to be used, people are going to be talking about it, but the shift from, okay, it's cool and it's here, to now it's integrated into every aspect of our lives, it's going to be a lot longer than people might think. So the societal adoption is probably going to be what's going to take longer than maybe the, arrival of this technology.
Yes. I was just thinking about my anchor segment, but yeah, in terms of when does AGI hit, essentially what I'm hearing you say is that, yeah, it could get here tomorrow. It could be in a decade from now, right? It's almost like what the faith people would say, oh yeah, when is the Messiah, or when is going to be the return of the divine creator coming back? And we can always guess, or we can hypothesize, or maybe even from a perspective of like a faith point of view, we could say, oh yeah, maybe there's these signs that are coming back. But yeah, will there be a sign where, okay, we have this massive, Godzilla-like robot that like controls New York City and is like climbing up the the Freedom Tower and this like massive robot? I mean, who knows, maybe. But I think that humans are smart enough, to know what a human looks like and feels like. And this is why, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is so effective in person, right? Is because you can sense that energy. You can actually sense not just the physical mass of a human being, but really all of the things that go into a real human connection, right? The smells, the sights, the tastes, the audio, that like, what are you hearing? All these different things, but also then in your emotions and your will and your power, these other senses, how do you really know if something is human or real? There's this show that I'll reference called Westworld. And if you've seen it, it is kind of a dark show where the robots kind of take over. And then you think that these characters are human, but in fact, they end up being these very lifelike robots. Now, yes, of course, we have that technology today. Will that be adopted by our older generations, or maybe our wiser generations who have come before us? Maybe, maybe not. Will our future generations be having intimacy and real emotional and cognitive conversations with robotics that are lifelike? I don't know. That's conjecture. Who knows? But we certainly know that there are a lot of technologies today that are imitating and or replacing humans. So what do we do in that route? We need to actually learn the technology, right, and the AI, and also say, oh yeah, we need to understand and better understand how technology integrates with our life today. So I really appreciate that. That is such an awesome perspective. And so we're actually going to go into our final segment, which is our segment called Beyond the Bag. And it's a really beautiful segment of the show. Beyond the bag, beyond the bag, beyond the bag. I'm excited for this with our guest today, Archie. So I have no idea what is in your bag. So I'm curious, what is actually in your bag? Something that you travel with as a creator, as someone who goes live. What is something that you never travel without?
Yeah, so I'm actually at my home office right now, as you can probably tell by the background. But so I'm not traveling at the moment. But I whenever I do travel, I tend to carry this is an RGB mouse. I tend to carry it everywhere I go because it's portable. It doesn't have a wire, so it's Bluetooth based. And
Nice.
I tend to take it wherever I may go for the sole purpose of the fact that it's really it helps me, it's sort of there's a certain sentimental value to it because it's like, hey, if I'm somewhere else, it sort of gives me the comfort of being where I am, like at my house or where I typically work, even if I'm like in a different country, in a different city. And it's also, very ergonomic, right? Because now I don't have to use my little trackpad on my laptop. I can use this, and it's not heavy, so it's not hard to carry around.
I love that. Those are perfect qualities for a beyond the bag item, something that is lightweight, has utility, and is something that you take with you everywhere. For me, I actually have not highlighted or showcased this, but I wanted to showcase that I carry my Headset Advisor headset with me everywhere I go. Shout out to Headset Advisor who sponsors this particular device. This is a YeaLink, a YEA-Link HB64 headset. And it is mobile. It connects to multiple things, also has a docking station. And then, of course, I can have those high quality calls when I'm either on the road or I need to be hands-free while I'm driving, or even if I want to have high quality audio in a noisy cafe or in a noisy train or bus on the streets. So that is my personal favorite. If you haven't checked out Headset Advisor, I would make sure you go check them out. Grab you one of these. This is a $450 headset. It's really beautiful. It's an awesome headset. I like how lightweight this is. It actually turns and folds. So you can actually get this to a very small footprint. And then I usually stick that in my little travel case bag, which I have a travel tech bag right here. So with that conclusion, I just want to give it back to Archie. Archie, what is the best way for people to get connected with you? And just remind us who you're looking to meet and how you best serve them.
Yeah, I think Twitter, LinkedIn, I try to check my messages pretty often. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm an AI technologist, a founder, and someone who's actively interested in research, especially around alignment and safety. So if you're interested in any of those categories, and please do feel to reach out, and maybe we can collaborate on something together.
Awesome, I love that. So LinkedIn, Archie, we'll make sure that you're tagged on all major platforms. Check Archie out on LinkedIn. You can find him from the David Daily Show, as well as my own personal LinkedIn as well. And we'll be continuing to post the follow-up video on this as well. So thank you so much, folks, for joining the David Daily today. We had a special episode of Funding, Faith, and Future Tech. If this is your first time watching, thank you so much, genuinely from the bottom of my heart, for tuning in. I really appreciate each and every viewer. And if you're feeling interested in watching tomorrow, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. I would love to see you show up in our comments, be an active part of our community and our newsletter. And if you want to be on this show, you can also become a guest as well at guest.thedaviddaily.com. And we love to talk with angels and investors and anyone who has a faith-minded leadership practice that they integrate in their startup or in their small, medium business, or even in their corporation. So if you work at a big company, you're also eligible to be on this show. And if you've invested $500K or more of your personal funds or that of a funding group or funding family office, we would be delighted to have you on the show. All right, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show. Signing out.